She was 18 years old when her father slid a folded check across the kitchen table without looking up. He didn't look up when he said she had the car and 2 months of insurance and that he thought she'd do fine. He didn't look up when she took the check. He kept his eyes on the table, the particular way a person does when they have made a decision they know is wrong and have decided to make it anyway. She walked out of that house in April with a check, a laundry bag of clothes, and $1,147 in a checking account she'd been building since she was 16. And 3 weeks later, she spent $1 of it on a decommissioned ranger station at the end of a fire road in the Blue Ridge foothills. A 1940s stone and timber building on 4.6 acres with no running water, no power, and a 40-foot fire lookout tower that hadn't been climbed by anyone in 5 years. The county surplus officer told her she was buying problems by the pound. But what no one in that county office knew was that the last ranger to work out of Hawk Ridge had left something behind when he retired. A flat cedar box on a high shelf in the back storage room, sealed and waiting for whoever came next. If stories like this are why you come here, please subscribe. It takes one tap, and it means everything to this channel. And drop a comment letting me know where in the world you're listening from. Now, back to Lena. Her parents had split when she was 14. Not loudly, it was one of those divorces that happens in stages, like something cooling, until one morning the house has a different temperature and then the furniture starts moving, and then one of them is gone. Her mother went to Phoenix to live near a sister. She called on birthdays and was kind on the phone and was, in all practical ways, somewhere else. Lena stayed with her father, Roy Hartley, who worked dispatch for a trucking company and was steady and good-natured, and, in the way of certain men, not particularly well equipped for the specific work of being someone's primary parent. He did his best. She had always understood that. He made sure there was food in the house. He came to the school things that mattered and forgot the ones that didn't, which was the same distribution most fathers arrived at. He drove her to work when her car needed a repair and picked her up from her shifts without complaint. And if he never asked the right questions or noticed the right things, she had come to understand, the way children do when they grow up faster than expected, that this was the kind of love he had, and that it was the only kind she was going to get from him. Darlene came into the picture when Lena was 15. She had 2 children of her own from a previous marriage, a boy of 10 and a girl of 8, and she managed the household with the competent authority of someone who had been doing it alone for years and had definite ideas about how it should be run. She was not cruel to Lena. She was simply clear, in the way that some people are clear about what belongs to them and what doesn't, and Lena, her father's daughter from another life, registered early that she was in the second category. She worked at Devereaux Hardware on Route 11, starting at 16, 4 afternoons a week and all day Saturday. She was good at the job. She knew where things were. She was patient with customers who didn't know what they needed. And the owner, a man named Gary who had run the store for 22 years, trusted her to close on Saturdays. She saved everything she didn't need to spend. She had a plan, or the beginning of one, a community college nearby, an associate's degree in something practical, an apartment she could afford on hardware store wages. It was not a large plan, but it was hers. The plan changed in April when Roy sat her down at the kitchen table 3 days after her 18th birthday and told her, quietly, and without Darlene present, that he thought it would be good for her to get out into the world. He said it the way people say things they have been coached to say. The phrasing was too careful, too measured, to be entirely his. He had the check already folded in his shirt pocket. He took it out and set it on the table and slid it toward her without lifting his eyes. $300, 2 months of car insurance, already paid. She looked at the check. She looked at his hands, flat on the table. She picked up the check. She said nothing, because there was nothing to say that wouldn't cost her something she didn't want to spend in that kitchen, and she went upstairs and packed. It didn't take long. It never does, when you've never fully unpacked. She stayed 2 nights at the house of a girl from work named Petra, whose mother said nothing about the extra person sleeping on the couch and who made enough eggs in the morning to include whoever was there. She stayed a week at a motel on the edge of town, using the 300 and watching the number in her checking account with the close attention of someone who has recently discovered how quickly it can move in the wrong direction. She drove around a lot. She thought about Phoenix. She thought about the community college plan, which now had a variable she hadn't budgeted for, which was the absence of a place to live. She found the listing on a Tuesday at the public library on a county government website she'd reached through 3 links from a different page she hadn't meant to be on. Dunford County Surplus Property Auction. Hawk Ridge Ranger Station, identified as County Parcel 114B, decommissioned by the County Forestry Department in September 2019. Listed features: main building, stone and timber construction, approximately 900 square feet, equipment shed, stone construction, approximately 300 square feet, fire observation tower, 40 feet, wood frame, 4.6 acres mixed hardwood forest, Spring Creek eastern boundary. Utilities disconnected, minimum bid, $1. Successful bidder assumes all code compliance obligations within 24 months. She read it twice. She looked at the satellite image, which showed a gray smudge of a building at the end of a thin gray line of road running into a green mass of forest. She wrote down the phone number. The county surplus property officer was named Bev Tanner. She answered on the second ring and had the no-nonsense quality of someone who had been explaining the same things to the same kinds of people for a long time. She said the building had been locked since 2019. She said the county had no record of structural issues, but had also not inspected it recently. She said the 4.6 acres was legally the property of the county and would transfer clean. She said the fire tower had passed its last inspection in August 2019. "Can I go look at it?" Lena said. Bev said she could and gave her a gate code for the fire road. She drove out on a Wednesday morning in late April. The fire road was gravel for the first 2 miles and dirt for the last half mile. The kind of road that has been maintained well enough to be passable and not well enough for anything else. The trees came in close on both sides, and when she reached the station clearing, she sat in the Cavalier for a moment, with the engine running before she got out. The main building was exactly as the satellite image suggested, and also entirely different. The satellite image had shown a shape. What she was looking at was a structure, stone walls 2 feet thick, quarried from local material, laid in the irregular courses that meant someone had built it by hand with time and patience. The timber framing above the stone was dark with age but sound. Moss had taken the north-facing wall from foundation to eave, a deep green that was not rot but growth, a living thing that had been there long enough to become part of the building. The porch ran the width of the front face, its floorboards gray and soft-looking, but not visibly failed. A pair of metal brackets above the door still held the shape of a sign that was no longer there, the outline of the screw holes in a rectangle, ghost of the word Hawk Ridge. She tried the door. Locked, as Bev Tanner had said. She walked around the perimeter, pressing on the stones, checking the foundation where it met the ground. Solid, the mortar had cracked in places along the north face. She made a note. But the stones themselves hadn't moved. A building built this way in the 1940s had been built by someone who expected it to be there in 100 years. She was not sure it wouldn't be. The fire tower rose from the east side of the building, connected by a short enclosed walkway at the base. 40 feet of timber framing, open-sided above the first landing, with a small enclosed cab at the top that sat at the level of the upper canopy. From where she stood in the clearing, she could see the cab and the long view it must have over the ridge. She walked around the building once. Then she climbed the outside of the tower. The access ladder ran up the south face, which she probably should not have done, and which she did anyway. From the cab, 40 feet up, she could see the full 6 acres and the creek line running along the eastern boundary and the ridge beyond, and through the trees, the glint of something on the lower slope of the eastern quarter that she couldn't quite make out. She climbed back down. She was back at the county office by 2 o'clock with her ID and her checkbook. "You're sure?" Bev Tanner said. It was not quite a question. "Yes, ma'am," Lena said. Bev looked at her for a moment with an expression that was not unkind. She stamped the transfer paperwork. $1. 4.6 acres, and the particular silence of a building that has been locked and left. She slept in the Cavalier the first 3 nights, parked in the clearing. Before she got the main room livable, she had a camp stove and a sleeping bag and a 5-gallon water jug, and she worked through the daylight hours cleaning and assessing and making a list that grew longer every time she added to it. The building smelled of wood ash and cold stone and the particular close air of a space that has been sealed a long time. She liked the smell. She opened every window and let the mountain air move through. The kitchen alcove had a hand pump connected to a cistern system that predated the county utilities connection. It needed work. She couldn't figure out yet whether it was salvageable. The wood stove in the main room was a Vogelsang cast iron box stove, heavy and squat, that she got burning on the second evening with the wood she found stacked and dry under the porch overhang. Somebody, presumably the forestry department, had left 2 cords split and covered. She sat in front of it that evening with the door cracked and her notepad and felt, for the first time since April, like she was somewhere she'd chosen to be. Not just somewhere she'd ended up, somewhere she'd chosen. That was a different thing. She had not expected to notice the difference so clearly. She sat with the wood stove and the notepad and the sound of the wind in the upper canopy until it was too dark to write, and then she sat a while longer. On the 4th day, she went through the storage room properly. It was smaller than the main room, lined on 3 walls with shelving, and the county had taken most of what was on the shelves: equipment, radio units, supplies. What was left was ordinary: an old topographic map in a cardboard tube, a box of miscellaneous hardware, 2 cans of paint that had long since dried to discs. And on the highest shelf, the 3rd shelf up, above eye level, pushed back against the wall behind a row of empty paint cans, a flat wooden box, approximately 18 inches long and a foot wide, made of cedar. She needed the step stool to reach it. The stool was the folding aluminum kind, borrowed from the porch where it had been left, and it wobbled slightly on the uneven stone floor, and she stood on it and reached past the empty paint cans and lifted the cedar box down. She could smell the cedar even before she opened it. The brass clasp on the front was tarnished, but functional. She took the box to the kitchen table and sat down. If you've made it this far, and I know you have, because this is exactly the moment, please subscribe if you haven't already. This channel is built on stories like this one, and your subscription is what keeps them coming. And now, because what Lena found in that cedar box is the reason this story exists. The box contained 4 things. The first was a bundle of journals. 34 of them, thin-spined, the kind sold in office supply stores in the 80s and 90s, each one labeled on the front cover in neat black marker, Hawk Ridge, followed by a year. The earliest was 1985, The most recent was 2019. 34 consecutive years of daily entries, in the same careful hand throughout. The handwriting of a man who took the same kind of notes in the same kind of book for his entire working life. She opened the 1985 volume. The first entry was dated April 3rd, and it described the weather, the soil temperature, the first wildflower emergence on the south-facing slope. Hepatica, it said. 3 inches. Protected hollow near the creek bend, and the track of a black bear she'd spotted crossing the upper clearing at 7:30. She set it down and picked up 2019. Same format. Same hand. Same slope of the hillside through 34 springs and summers and falls and winters, recorded without interruption. The second thing was a hand-drawn map of the property. Not a copy of the county plat. This was something the person who had drawn it had walked themselves, inch by inch, because the level of detail was impossible any other way. It showed the creek line on the eastern boundary with specific depth notations at 6 points. It showed the contour lines of the north slope and the drainage pattern of the upper clearing after rain. And on the eastern quarter, approximately 200 yards from the main building, it showed a blue circle with a notation beside it. Spring. Potable. Tested annually 1985-2019. Flow rate 3.2 gal/min. A spring. On the property. Flowing. Tested. Drinkable. Not mentioned anywhere in the county listing. Not on the official plat. She looked at the map for a long time. The third thing was a sealed envelope. Cream-colored, the self-adhesive kind, with 2 words written on the front in the same neat hand for the next one. She opened it carefully and read the letter inside. It was from Harold Dix, who had been the ranger at Hawk Ridge from 1985 to 2019. He said he was 72 and retired now, and that he had moved to Abingdon, Virginia, and that he was perfectly well, in case she wondered. He said he had known, when he retired, that the station would go to county surplus, and he had thought a great deal about what to leave and what to take. He had taken his personal effects. He had left the journals because they belonged to the place more than to him. 34 years of Hawk Ridge, documented season by season, was the kind of record that should stay with Hawk Ridge. He had left the spring survey because whoever owned the property should know the spring was there and that it was good water, and he had left the map to the fourth thing. He said, "I have been growing a stand of American ginseng on the eastern quarter of the property since 1989. It is in the location marked on the enclosed map. I harvest it each autumn, carefully and sustainably, never more than a third of the mature roots, leaving the rest to continue. I did not harvest in 2019 because I retired in August and it was not yet time. The stand has been growing unattended since then. If you are reading this, the crop is yours to harvest responsibly or to tend as you see fit. The buyer in Asheville I have used for 30 years is a man named Pete Garland at the Blue Ridge Botanical Exchange, and he is honest and pays fair market." He said one more thing. At the bottom of the letter, as a kind of postscript, he had written, "Stay through one winter. That's all it takes." She read the letter twice. She set it down on the table beside the spring map and the stack of journals. The cedar box still had one thing in it, a folded piece of paper with the eastern quarter of the property drawn in more detail. The ginseng stand marked with a series of small crosses arranged in a rough oval, about 40 feet across, in the hollow below the third ridge. She put her coat on and went outside. She found the spring first, because it was closer. 200 yards east of the main building, in a hollow where the ground went soft underfoot, water welled up from between 2 flat stones in a thin, clear column and ran in a small channel toward the creek. Cold, she cupped a hand and drank. It tasted of iron and mountain cold and nothing that shouldn't be there. She stood at the spring for a while, She thought about the county listing that had not mentioned it. She thought about Harold Dix, who had tested it every year for 34 years and mapped it, and left the map where she would find it. The ginseng stand was in the hollow below the third ridge, approximately as Harold's map had indicated. She would not have known what she was looking at without the map. The plants were low and unassuming, growing in the dappled light under the oak canopy with the particular patience of slow things. She crouched down and looked at several of them without touching. She counted. There were more than she could count from that position. She came back to the main room and sat down at the table with Harold Dix's letter and her notepad and looked at the ceiling for a while. The wood stove was still going. Outside, the afternoon light was moving through the upper canopy at the angle that meant it was getting on toward 5 o'clock. She picked up her phone and searched for Pete Garland at the Blue Ridge Botanical Exchange in Asheville. He had a website and a phone number, and a page about fair trade sourcing of Appalachian botanicals. She called. He answered. She told him she had just purchased Hawk Ridge Ranger Station and had found Harold Dix's letter and was calling to introduce herself because Harold had recommended she do so. There was a pause on the line. "Harold," Pete Garland said. "How is he?" "I haven't spoken to him yet," she said. "I just found the letter today." Another pause. "Well," Pete said. "Welcome to Hawk Ridge." She called Harold Dix that evening, using the phone number Pete had been willing to share. He answered on the fourth ring, and she told him who she was and how she'd found his letter, and there was a silence on the line that was not uncomfortable, the silence of someone taking a moment to receive something they had not been certain was coming. "How old are you?" Harold said. 18, she said. He was quiet again. Then he said, "The journals are indexed in the front of the 1985 volume. Plant species are alphabetical. Weather patterns are in the appendix of each year. The spring, don't let anyone put a structure over the source. It needs air." He paused. "I'd like to come see it, if that would be all right." "It would," she said. Opal Greer ran the general store at the base of the fire road, a converted single wide with a hand-lettered sign and a cooler of drinks and a rack of local goods and a table near the window where coffee was always available if you wanted to sit, though Opal did not make a fuss about it either way. She was 74, compact and tart in the way of small women who have run their own establishments for a long time and have no patience for anything that wastes her morning. She had seen many people go up the fire road over the years and come back down, and she had assumed whoever bought the ranger station would be a man in his 40s with an off-grid ambition. When Lena walked in on a Saturday morning and introduced herself as the new owner, Opal looked at her for a long moment. "You're keeping it?" Opal said. "Yes, ma'am." Opal poured her a coffee without being asked and sat down at the table across from her and asked her 3 direct questions about the building's condition. When Lena had answered all 3 with accurate information rather than optimism, Opal's expression shifted slightly toward approval. She said she'd known Harold Dix for 30 years and that he was a good man and had kept the station well. She said the fire road got icy by Thanksgiving and stayed that way through February, and that Lena should get her tires sorted before then. This was advice, not a question, and Lena took it as the particular form of welcome it was. She mentioned the lantern. She said Harold had put a post at the trail junction 2 miles down from the station back in 1989 and had hung a kerosene lantern on it from November through March, every evening at dusk, as a beacon for hikers who might be caught out after dark. He'd done it for 30 years, right up until he retired. The post was still there. She'd seen it on a walk the previous fall, but there was no lantern on it now. Lena made a note. Harold came in October. He arrived in a dark green pickup, parked in the clearing, and stood with his hands in his jacket pockets looking at the main building for a few minutes before he came up the steps. He was a tall man, slightly stooped now, with a deeply weathered look of someone who had spent several decades outdoors regardless of the weather. He did not appear surprised by anything he found, which was itself a compliment. It meant the station looked the way it should look, which meant she had been doing things right. He moved through the rooms the way a person moves through a place they know well and have not seen in a while, not inspecting, exactly, but taking account. He stood in the main room for a moment and looked at the stove, which she had cleaned and blacked, and which was burning with an efficiency that she was proud of. He looked at the journals, which she had organized on the storage room shelves by year. He looked at the kitchen alcove, where she had gotten the hand pump working again after 2 weeks of effort, and an instructional video she had watched 17 times. "You got the pump going," he said. "3rd week of May," she said. He nodded once, which she had begun to understand was his version of well done. He went through the journals with her at the kitchen table and showed her how he had indexed them and what the shorthand in the margins meant. He showed her the methodology of his ginseng harvest, walking her through the hollow with a patience that matched the patience of the plants themselves. She had done a partial harvest in September, her first, following the protocol from his notes, and had driven the route to Asheville herself. Pete Garland had paid her $1,140 for 6 pounds of dried root. She had deposited every cent. Harold looked at the spring survey she had filed with the county environmental office, which she had done on the recommendation of a woman at the Water Resources Division, who had told her, plainly, that an undocumented potable spring on private land in this watershed was a more interesting thing than Lena might realize. A neighboring rural water cooperative had been managing diminished supply for 3 years. The conversations about access rights were early, nothing finalized. But Opal had told her plainly that the county paid attention to these things, and that she should too. Harold read the survey carefully, the way he read most things. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I always thought someone would find it worth something." He came back in January. He came back in March. By then, Lena had strung a power line from the utility connection at the Fire Road entrance and had running water in the kitchen and a wood stove that heated the main room and the sleeping area with efficiency. She had applied to the university's environmental science program, not to transfer, but to offer the journals and a structured monitoring partnership. Because a professor there who had been in contact with Harold for years had written her a careful letter explaining that 34 years of continuous field data from a single Appalachian site was the kind of longitudinal record that her department did not have, and very much wanted. The arrangement was still being worked out. There would be funding attached to it. Not a great deal. Enough, in the first week of November, she bought a kerosene lantern from the hardware store in the valley, not Devereaux, a different store, though she thought about Gary when she bought it, and carried it 2 miles down to the trail junction. The post was still standing, iron bracket and all, exactly where Opal had said it was. She hung the lantern on the bracket, filled it, and lit it at dusk. The flame caught. The pool of light it threw was not large. It didn't need to be. She walked the 2 miles back to the station in the dark, which she had done before and was not afraid of. The trees were bare now, and the sky above them was very clear, and the cold had the specific quality of November in the mountains, which is the cold that means winter is done coming and has arrived. She built the stove up when she got inside and set the kettle on and sat at the kitchen table with the 1985 journal open, reading Harold's account of the first November he'd spent at Hawk Ridge, 39 years before. At some point around 10 o'clock, her phone lit up with a call from a number she knew. Her father. She watched it ring. He had called once before, in July, and left a voicemail that she had listened to and not returned. He'd said something about hearing she was doing all right, and said he was proud of her. Kid. in the way of a man saying something true that has arrived about 4 months too late to matter the way it once would have. She watched the phone ring now and let it go to voicemail again. She would listen tomorrow. She might call back. Eventually, she was not angry. She simply had something now. A building and a spring and a stand of slow-growing plants and 34 journals full of the same hillside documented through every kind of weather, and the building required nothing of her except her attention. And that felt like enough. Roy Hartley would hear more about it in the spring, through the cousin who had already heard through someone else. That was the shape of things. She didn't need him to hear it from her. Some places are not simply found. They are recognized by the people who arrive with the right kind of patience, the right kind of need, and the willingness to stay and find out what has been there all along. Harold Dix had understood this, which was why he had put the journals on the high shelf and sealed the envelope and written 4 words at the bottom of his letter. He had not known who would come. He had known that if someone stayed through the winter, they had understood the place. And if they had understood the place would take care of the rest. She stayed through the winter. That was all it took. If this story found you at the right time today, please subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, has there ever been a place, a building, a stretch of land, a room somewhere that felt like it matched you the moment you walked into it? I'd love to hear about it. See you in the next one.